to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the recent rumors that have come out about the safety Anthony Harris. Now, I know that Bad Dog made a video on this about a week ago. It was also reported by Giants Wire. I elected not to do a video that day, probably because I had like 3 other videos up that day. But now the rumors are starting to resurface. They had died down the next day or the day after, from what I had read, that the Vikings were working on a contract extension and that it didn't seem like the Giants or the Browns, who's the other reported team, had much interest. Now, this is being reported by a credible source. The individual works for ABC in Minnesota. We'll get into the exact credentials and who's reporting it in a second. But Anthony Harris, of course, one of the better safeties in the league. And we all know as Giants fans, the Giants are being mocked to take a safety in the second round of this year's draft in several mocks. They could use a free safety. Of course, Peppers is more of a guy that, is an in-the-box guy that could do a variety of things, but they could use a center fielder. Well, nobody was better in the league last year. He was the highest-graded safety in all of football. He led the league in interceptions. Now, the cons to Anthony Harris, well, 1, you don't know how much he's going to command, and 2, he's getting up there in age. He's 29 years old. You're not talking about, as I like to say often, a spring chicken. What he would look to command in terms of a contract? Well, from reports that have come out, he's looking for a multi-year deal. He makes $11.4 million on the franchise tag. Why is he looking for a multi-year deal, being that the market is set to go up tremendously next year? Well, I think it's probably mainly because of his age. Not a lot of teams are going to be looking for a prime 30-year-old safety next year, and what if he regresses? So I completely get why he would be looking for that long-term deal and why the New York Giants may potentially be a suitor, being that is a huge need of theirs. Of course, we heard rumors that they were potentially interested in McCourty. McCourty ended up going back to the New England Patriots, who's a little bit older, got a 3-year deal. I would think Harris would want at least that at the exact price minimum that McCourty got. I think McCourty got about $12 million a year. I think he'd want at least what he's making now on a per-year basis for 3 years, if not more. Of course, Landon Collins got $14 million per year, but he was younger when he hit the open market. Could Harris make sense for the right price with the New York Giants? Absolutely. It would instantly make our secondary that much more credible. It would allow the Giants to focus exclusively in terms of the defense on the coverage linebacker aspect, maybe a slot corner, as well as a pass rusher in the draft. It would free up a lot of things in terms of the draft, and Anthony Harris has been rumored to the Giants for quite some time. Before he was franchise tagged, a lot of people thought the Giants could target Harris in free agency as well as a potential trade. But let's get into some of the stories with the Minnesota Vikings regarding Anthony Harris. First thing I want to do for you guys was pull up his statistics. Like I said, he's not that young. Even though he's only been in the league for 5 years, he's going to be 29 next year. He started at the age of 24. He's played, he started with the Vikings now really for the last 2 years. Last year was the first time he was a full-time starter. He started 14 games, led the league in interceptions with 6, and like I said, was the highest-graded safety in all of football, as he's right now in the prime of his career. I'm not giving this guy a 4 or 5 year contract extension. I'm just not. He's 29 years old. You'd be paying him to 33, 34. 3-year deal could make a lot of sense based on the trade, and I'm not giving up a first-round pick. I'm just not doing it. If you're talking a 3rd, a 4th, yeah, we could talk turkey at that point because he is a very talented player and could definitely help out the New York Giants in terms of coverage, being that elite center fielder. And he's a playmaker. Like I said, he led the league in interceptions. But I'm not giving up supreme draft capital to bring in a guy that's going to be almost 30 years old next year. Just doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you factor in you're going to have to pay him at least $12 million a year on a 3-year contract, and I think that's bare minimum. Next thing we're going to pull up is the headline to the report that came out. Report, Anthony Harris trade possibility back on the table. Now, it was initially on the table, like I said about a week ago, came off the table when they said they were working on a long-term deal. Harris supposedly wanted to come back there if they could get things worked out. Well, now, apparently, it seems as if things are not working out, and they are at least open to the possibility of trading Harris, tag and trade scenario. And it makes a lot of sense. They've obviously had a lot of turnover on that roster. It does not look like the Vikings are a win-now football team at this point in time. And this is according to Darren Wolfson. Like I said, Darren Wolfson works for ABC, and I'll get into his exact credentials at the end of this video. According to KSTP TV's Darren Wolfson, speaking on his podcast, the contract negotiations between the Minnesota Vikings and Anthony Harris are not quite going so well. And the possibility of trading the Pro Bowl safety during the NFL draft is back on the table. The Vikings placed the franchise tag on Harris prior to the start of free agency, but according to Wolfson, the attempts to work out a long-term deal with the Pro Bowl safety haven't been productive. Next thing we'll talk about is his mentioning of the New York Giants. Wolfson mentions the New York Giants as a potential suitor, adding that the former Vikings offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski, who's of course now the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, now has eyed a potential reunion with Harris. And I've read that in prior articles as well, that the Giants and Browns both had showed interest previously with Harris. In terms of his contract, this year, like I said, he was franchise tagged. He is set to make $11.4 million. I'm not exactly sure what he would want. Obviously, he wants long-term security, being that he's approaching 30. He's probably looking for at least a 3 or possibly even 4-year deal at least a $12 million rate, if I had to guess, based on the fact that how strong of a season he had last year. In terms of Darren Wolfson's credentials, because I always like you guys to know where I'm getting my information from, he is, a credible source. He has the check mark on Twitter there. He's got over 43,000 followers, and this was his credentials. Darren Wolfson worked for more than 12 years on K-Fan Radio, a Twin Cities sports talk format station. He filled many roles and wore multiple hats, from producing and technically directing to reporting and hosting. He spent the majority of his tenure working with Sid Hartman's son, Chad, on the popular Chad Hartman Show. After leaving K-Fan in January of 2009, Darren worked for CBSSports.com, covering the Vikings, TheStarTribune.com, and now, like I said, he currently works for what is essentially ABC, for the Minnesota area. Well, he covers the Minnesota Vikings. So he certainly has some credentials. I think he's a credible source reporting that the Vikings are at least entertaining the thought of looking to trade Anthony Harris in the draft this year for potential draft capital. The question, of course, for the Vikings would be, what would they obtain, and do they view Harris as being a guy that will be on the team when this team gets good? Do I think it makes a lot of sense for the Giants? I mean, in terms of improving this year's team, absolutely. But when you factor in the point that the guy's 29, by the time your team's probably going to be good, he's going to be 30, 31. He's going to be up there in age. I don't know if it makes a lot of sense. If you're a team looking to win this year, like the Cleveland Browns certainly could be, all signs point to the fact that the New York Giants do not seem to be a win-now team this year. They didn't make huge splashes in free agency. Yes, I expect them to be more competitive, but a guy like Anthony Harris is not going to put you over the top by himself. Would he be a great talent to add to this defense? Absolutely. For me, it depends on the price. It depends on the length of the contract. If it's a 3-year deal at a somewhat affordable rate at $12 million per, I'd be interested, depending on what they're asking me to give up in draft capital. But I'm not giving up top-tier talents in terms of the draft to bring in a safety who's going to be 29 next year, as great of a talent as Anthony Harris has displayed, especially last season. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.